Congressman Colin Allred, welcome back to Eye on Politics.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jack.
You bet. So here we are weeks away from the November 5th election, and the Cook Political Report now says this race, the Senate race, is more competitive. The Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee has injected millions of dollars to your campaign, and you've gotten the endorsements from former Republican elected officials in Congress and here in North Texas. What is your path to victory?
Yeah, well, I think that this momentum that we're seeing is a reflection of what we always knew, that this is a close race, and I think that the national folks are just now maybe coming on board with that. But I'm incredibly proud of the support that we've gotten from Republicans who I've served with, like Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger. Adam is now a Texan, of course, but also of local North Texans like Judge Glenn Whitley and Jason Villalba, who I think are respected figures in the Republican Party, who feel like, listen, we can't have 6 more years of Ted Cruz in the way that he has not served our state. And even though it's incredibly difficult to cross party lines in a time like this, that they're doing that because they think that other constitutional conservatives, other serious conservatives should do the same. And I want everyone out there to know that you can be part of this coalition. We can have somebody who can represent all of Texas.
Are there enough Republicans, though, for you to win, let's say, Tarrant County and the state?
Yeah. Well, I don't see us that way, and I never have. I think that we are trying to appeal to every Texan. And I want every Texan to know my story of how I've grown up here in North Texas, raised by a single mom, making it to Baylor and the NFL, and have been the most bipartisan Texan in Congress. And I want to serve all of us in the Senate. And I think that's something that hopefully we can bring a coalition together that might be a little unusual looking, but that can be successful in a place like Tarrant County or Collin County or Denton County, because we know that we want to do well there, but we want to do well everywhere. I want every Texan to know that I want to serve them.
Let's say you win November 5th, and it comes a time because you got money from the Democratic Senatorial Campaign, Leader Schumer leading that effort in part. If you were to win, how do you say no to him when he's strong-arming you for a vote and it may not be how you feel because it goes against the state of Texas's interest?
Well, this is nothing new for me. I've had congressional races that were of national importance, and so national support came in, and I'm still been very willing, of course, to say when I disagree and when I think it's not good for Texas, and I'll always do that. And to me, folks coming in and getting involved with this campaign is just a reflection of what we've been building here in Texas on the ground and the focus that I've kept on Texas issues, particularly what Ted Cruz has done to our state in terms of being uniquely responsible for the abortion ban that we have here in Texas, wanting to cut Medicare and Social Security, and refusing to help us secure the border, whereas I have a record of really delivering for our veterans, for our economy, of doing it in a bipartisan way, and want to make sure that we can take that now to the entire state. And so to me, that's what I'll always be focused on. I'll always be a Texan first. I've been that way for 6 years. It's not an election year promise. I'll hopefully be able to do that in the Senate.
Wanted to ask you about Nate Silver's 538 blog. Said that you voted 100% of the time with President Biden from 2021 to 2023. So where's the disagreement?
Yeah. Well, I think it's kind of interesting. You see some of these things that pick up. At the same time, I'm also being endorsed by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. I'm also winning an award from an independent group being named the most bipartisan Texan in Congress. And so you can cherry pick statistics, and it depends on what vote you're talking about. Because I'm also condemning the Biden administration when I think they're not doing the job on the border. But when you're in the Congress, you are also part of the crafting of legislation. For example, the infrastructure bill. You can call that a vote with President Biden, but it's a bipartisan bill that I helped put together, and it's bringing $35 billion to our state. Or the CHIPS and Science Act. John Cornyn helped push that through in the Senate. Mike McCall on the House side, a Republican. Me on the House side here in Texas. We are benefiting from that tremendously here in Texas. So it depends on how you look at it. But also, you have to look at the total of how someone has served. And when independent groups and outside observers say this is somebody who has been abnormal in how hard they've worked to reach outside of the party, who've been working to try and get things done, then I think you should take a look at that, because it's something that is an indication of how you've actually served instead of just cherry picking statistics.
So you brought up a lot of issues. Let's talk about border security. I know that you were on a video when you ran back in 2017. You called the border wall, racist, but you told me back in February 2018, I have a problem with the wall, period. I think we as a country cannot allow the symbol of this country to become a wall with barbed wire on top of it. The symbol of our country is the Statue of Liberty, and it has to remain that way. And now you're appearing in an ad, one of your ads, and the border wall is right there. So how do you square that? How can you be against the wall, but then you're shooting an ad in front of it?
Well, it's not, let's be clear. When people were talking about this, especially back 6 years ago, we're talking about more of a symbol than what I consider to be responsible border security. And that's what I've always opposed, is symbols that can make us seem like we're something else, that can also be used to target others in Texas to make them feel like they're not welcome here. And that was what I was worried about at the time. That's what I'm still worried about. When we have a conversation about having a secure border, we have to also make sure that we're not doing it in a way that makes folks who are here, who are Latinos or others, feel like they are not welcome. And that is a continuing concern of mine. But border security, which is my family's from the border, is a different conversation. And I've always said from the first month I was elected, and we had a town hall and I was asked about it, that physical barriers have a role to play in border security, in addition to technology, personnel, and policy changes. And what did Ted Cruz do when he took down the border bill that we had earlier this year? It was $20 billion for technology to catch fentanyl, for 1,000 new Border Patrol agents, for policy changes to the asylum system to make it so that more folks would be denied asylum at the initial stage, and then also making it easier for us to process them faster to get through this backlog that we have. That's actual border security. It's not something that's a symbol trying to target a certain community.
He's been asked about that, and he has said that he backed H.R. 2, the House bill, the Secure Border Act. And so that provision, or that bill that was passed in the House by Republicans, obviously, backed building more border wall. Is that why you oppose that?
No. That bill was not a serious attempt at border security. And let's be very clear. Border security is going to have to be bipartisan, and working on this in a bipartisan way. H.R. 2 was a symbolic bill intended to just have, for people like Ted Cruz to say they support that and then never do anything. If you actually want to get something done, you have to roll up your sleeves and work together. That's what one of the most conservative senators in the country did, working as part of crafting the Senate bill, a senator from Oklahoma, Senator Langford, to try and put together a serious attempt to secure the border. $20 billion, and Texans should know this, for more immigration judges, for more Border Patrol personnel, for more asylum personnel, for technology to catch fentanyl, for money for communities along the border impacted by what's been happening there. It was a serious attempt. And Ted Cruz, when he had the opportunity, said, we don't need a border bill. And he took it down. And he did it because he'd rather run on the issue than solve it. And what does that actually mean? It means that you think you're more important than Texas. And so let's be very clear about how things actually happen. When you're actually going to get it done, whether it's CHIPS and Science or the infrastructure bill, or trying to address something as big as how do we secure our southern border, we have to work together. And you can't just say, if I don't get my way, I'm not going to be a part of it. I've never been that way in my time in Congress. But Ted Cruz has 12 years of showing that's how he serves. And if he doesn't get everything he wants, he's not going to be a part of it. And what that often means is he's just not a part of anything.
What do you make of the state of Texas spending $11 billion to secure the border? Do you think that Texas taxpayers should be reimbursed by Congress?
I do think that when the federal level, when we don't act, that it leaves a vacuum, and that other folks then have to step into it or feel like something has to be done. And so to me, this is a big issue that we have to respond to at the federal level, but it's a federal responsibility. And when we don't act, when Ted Cruz does this, he then places more burdens on others. But the way this works is that sometimes I think that we have bad actors who step into that vacuum and who are doing things that are more stunts than actual border security. And so that's what I often see happening in terms of what the state of Texas is doing. There are some things that can be somewhat helpful, but some of it seems to be more of a stunt to grab attention than actual border security. And what you've seen is when we had a change in policy at the federal level to change our asylum process, an executive order, now we're at the lowest rate of border crossings in several years because of the change in policy at the federal level. That wasn't anything that was done at the state level, but we had to have that action at the federal level. That's what I was calling for and saying that we need to have more urgency towards. That's why I disagreed with the administration having not done that sooner. That's also why I think we need more resources at the federal level to help continue this trend of lower crossings.
Right, and the news just came out today that the lowest levels were last month in September of people coming into the southern border. But do you think Texas taxpayers should be reimbursed by Congress?
Well, that's complicated, but what I think is that we have to act at the federal level, and I think that Ted Cruz has prevented us from doing that, not just this year, Jack. This is something he's done for over a decade. Back in 2013, when there was an effort, a bipartisan effort with President Obama and John McCain and the Gang of Eight at that time is what they called it, Marco Rubio, to have a comprehensive reform to our immigration system and billions of dollars for important border security changes. Ted Cruz helped take down that effort too. And all along the way, where is the Cruz bill? I mean, honestly, we're over 12 years. Where's the Cruz bill to address something happening at the southern border? He wants to talk about HR 2, that's a House bill. Where's the Cruz bill? There isn't one. Because all he wants to do is talk about the issue, not solve it. When I'm in the Senate, I will.
Let's talk about the economy. If you're elected, what is your plan for economic growth and to help people who've really been struggling under the high costs of groceries, gas, you name it.
Yeah.
A lot of people are unhappy.
Yeah. Well, we've had a crisis of affordability before the pandemic hit. That was largely around housing, childcare, and healthcare. And those are all areas that I've been trying to address my entire time in Congress, and that I think will be a top focus of mine, certainly in the Senate. Beginning with housing, we have to increase our housing supply dramatically. We have to increase our affordable housing. And also when it comes to childcare, this is something I know, personally, and it's been a focus of mine, as I think you know, over some time, to try and help young families in those early tough years, whether it's family leave or trying to address the cost of childcare itself or pre-K. These are all things that work together to help reduce that burden for young families and for early families. And then, of course, when it comes to healthcare, we cap the cost of insulin at $35 a month for seniors. We tried to do that for everyone, but folks like Ted Cruz blocked it. We kept the out-of-pocket costs starting next year for seniors at $2,000 a year for their prescription drugs. I want to continue to lower healthcare costs. But even as we see inflation coming down and as we see prices starting to settle, as somebody who was raised by a single mother, I know how difficult it is when you go through the grocery store line, you're not sure if you're going to be able to afford everything you put on the belt, and then sometimes you have to put something back. That's how I grew up. And so I'll always be focused on lowering folks' costs. But what is Ted Cruz's alternative? It's basically to cut taxes for the rich again. And that's not going to help these working families who need somebody who not only knows their experience, but wants to work for them.
So let me ask you, do you support Vice President Harris's plan to boost the child tax credit to $6,000 per child, incentive to buy a new house, and policies that outlaw price gouging, I guess food prices at grocery stores, et cetera?
Yeah, well listen, the child tax credit expansion was incredibly successful for Texas and had a huge impact. In fact, speaking with the folks here at the North Texas Food Bank, they could tell me that they could track when the child tax credit hit folks' bank accounts because need for them for what they offered would go down until it came back again the next month. And it helped us reduce poverty dramatically for children in Texas. And so I'm very supportive of expanding and using the child tax credit to help working families. When it comes to housing, I think the first thing we have to do is address the supply. Because if we don't address increasing our supply of housing, then we'll just be driving up the cost. There's a good arguments for helping first-time home buyers, and I want to see us do that at some point. But I think the first priority has to be a national housing plan to increase the amount of housing that we're offering, which will also help lower costs overall. And so those are the things that I'm focused on.
And you talked a little bit about tax cuts, and as you know, the Trump tax cuts, that plan is really going to decide next year what happens to it, right, as far as whether they should be allowed to expire or not. Do you think that any part of that plan for individual tax rates, corporate tax rates, et cetera, should be eliminated or should be made permanent?
Well, listen, I definitely think that we need to keep taxes low on the middle class, and I want to see where we can even go further, and that's a focus of mine. I think we'll have a conversation around what is a responsible landing area for taxes on our wealthiest Americans who have done the best in this economy. And I want to continue to be what I've always been in my time in Congress, which is somebody who's very responsive and understands that when our businesses do well, they employ a lot of folks who then are able to take care of their families. And so I'll always stay in touch with our business community in terms of what is actually going to help them be competitive in this global marketplace, where they're competing not just here at home, but all over the world. And so that'll always be something that I'll take on board. And as we go through that process, I'll do it in a responsible way that we'll bring in experts and input, and we'll try and land at a place where we can both meet the needs of our economy so that we can serve out what we're trying to do, but also do it in a responsible way for the middle class.
We're speaking on October 7th, and 1 year later, and I'm wondering, you have said since we've interviewed about this that you oppose a ceasefire. Do you still oppose a ceasefire? And the French President Macron over the weekend called for an arms embargo against Israel. Where are you on that?
Yeah. Well, what I've said is I oppose a ceasefire without any conditions, because what that would have meant was leaving hundreds of hostages in Hamas's hands and leaving Hamas with the ability to conduct what they did on October 7th, an October 7th style terrorist attack. And we can never allow that. What we have seen over the course of months is that Hamas has been, their ability to do something like that has been decimated, and the Israeli Defense Minister, Gallant, has said that they are no longer basically an organized military unit anymore. And so we are in a different place, and I've said recently that we need to have a negotiated end to that conflict in which the remaining hostages, and unfortunately, there are not many that are likely left alive, in which they are allowed to come back, and we can start trying to find a way forward in terms of Gaza and the West Bank and try and not settle, but move towards what can eventually be a much more stable status quo, hopefully, of an independent Palestinian state next to a stable Jewish and democratic Israel. But we've also, of course, seen an expansion into Lebanon with Hezbollah. They launched, I think, 11,000 rockets over the course of this last year into northern Israel. And that was always going to trigger a response. But as that response is conducted, to me, I want to make sure that it doesn't spill over into a regional war with Iran. That's not, I think, in Israel's interest at this time or in the United States' interest. And so while we, I think, have to continue to support Israel, and I'm proud that we helped take down that massive missile attack that the Iranians launched on Israel. That was part of the efforts that we put into Iron Dome and also our carrier groups in the area, and also working with the Israelis to take those down. That's good, but we also, I think, have to try and contain this from becoming a wider regional war.
And what do you say, this was asked at the vice presidential debate, if Israel should launch a preemptive strike against Iran's nuclear capabilities, which may be a week or two away?
Well, in fact, we don't know how, their breakout time is unknown at this point. And what that means is if they were to pursue nuclear material, we wouldn't know until they'd already achieved it. And that, I think, was a failure of the previous administration by pulling out of the Iranian nuclear deal that had inspections and a regime to keep that in place. And to me, as I said, we have to try and avoid a regional war at this point. We've had a year of war of choice by Hamas, a horrific terrorist attack on the Israeli people, 1,200 killed that day, hundreds of hostages taken, unspeakable acts of cruelty. It was a war of choice by Hamas. But we also have to find a diplomatic solution to where we go forward, because we know, and the U.S. has been a part of this over a decade of our own warfare in the Middle East, that military power alone will not be able to resolve what are ultimately long-simmering political and social conflicts.
Let's talk about abortion rights, reproductive rights. You've supported codifying Roe v. Wade nationally, and Vice President Harris has said she supports ending the Senate filibuster, the 60-vote threshold, to allow for this vote, so it would be a simple 51-vote majority. Do you agree with that?
Well, first let's talk about what's happening in Texas, because it is horrific, and Texans should know. And I come across some Texans who aren't actually fully aware that we don't have any exceptions for rape or incest in our state law here, and 26,000 Texas women have been forced to give birth to their rapist child since Dobbs came down, according to the Houston Chronicle. There are these continuing stories that we hear every single day of families who are forced into unspeakable, really, decisions about whether or not to have to leave their state and go somewhere and be treated in a place that they've never been by doctors they've never met at a cost they may not be able to afford, or go through something very difficult and ultimately could be tragic for them here at home. And so this is, to me, Ted Cruz's abortion ban. He is uniquely responsible for this in a way that no other Texas leader could claim to be, because he put the judges on the district court, circuit court, and Supreme Court level to do this. He backed state legislators, knowing, often in primaries, knowing that they would put in place these laws. He called for and celebrated the Dobbs decision, said it was a massive victory. Well, a massive victory is how we're playing this out. I don't think it's been a massive victory for Texas women and families. And we have to restore this right at the federal level by codifying Roe v. Wade. I've been very clear that I think we should reform the filibuster to do that. I want to go back to the historical use of the filibuster as a speaking filibuster. But to me, the main point that I want Texans to know is that I will restore this right, and that Ted Cruz is responsible for taking it away.
So just to be clear on the filibuster issue, you're saying that this should be eliminated, the 60 vote threshold?
No,
or
this
what,
is
what would,
yeah.
I mean, is this an example of where it should not be a 60 vote threshold, where this should
Yeah,
be a
so
simple majority?
what I've said, I'm a student of this and the history of the Senate. We're actually in an ahistorical period now where the filibuster is applied just by saying you object, and legislation still moves, and everything is subjected to a 60 vote threshold. That's not the history of the Senate, actually. For most of our history, most of the major legislation that we're all familiar with passed on a majority vote in the Senate, not a 60 vote threshold, because it wasn't filibustered. And when the filibuster was used, it was used sparingly, and it was a speaking filibuster, where you held the floor and other legislation didn't move. And that meant that there was a cost to filibustering, because you had to actually go out and speak, and other things that you wanted maybe to do weren't getting done. But it also meant that on the other legislation, there was more bipartisanship, because you had more interest, if there wasn't going to be a filibuster, to be involved with it. And so to me, reforming the filibuster to go back to its traditional role as a speaking filibuster, one where if you want to hold the floor, you can hold it and nothing else moves, but there have a cost to that. If you say you object, why do you object? Explain it. And I also think Texans and the American people will then have more of an opportunity to hear what your objection is to a piece of legislation. And to me, the greatest deliberative body in the world was meant for that. That's what the Senate has been called. So I want to go back to the traditional use of the filibuster.
And what's your reaction just today? The Supreme Court let stand a lower court ruling that basically upholds Texas's law, doesn't force Texas to require hospitals to provide emergency abortions. What's your reaction to that?
I mean, this is just further example of why we have to codify Roe v. Wade, go back to the standard that we've had for the last 50 years, because Texas hospitals, Texas physicians, and I've spoken to them about this, they are left in incredible limbo and danger. And there are lawyers, not doctors, determining whether a woman is sick enough to get the treatment they need. And when is that threshold crossed that you're on death's door? And who is making that determination? And who is willing to, if they're wrong, maybe go to jail for 99 years, which is the potential in Texas. And so this is how this is working out, is that women are being turned away. And then they are bleeding out in their cars in parking lots, or in the emergency rooms themselves, or they're being found by their husbands on the floor in their bathroom, white as a sheet, and going through some kind of horrific complication. These are stories that I've heard, and this is happening in Texas right now. And so since the Supreme Court's not going to do it, they also are responsible for having taken away this right. And since we know Ted Cruz is not going to do it, we have to beat him in this election, and I will. I will restore this right. I will also restore confidence for our medical providers that they can keep their Hippocratic oath by taking care of their patients when they need them.
Last question. Appreciate your time, Congressman, and that is just on this Supreme Court. I know some Democrats have said they would like to increase the numbers of Supreme Court justices. President Biden has proposed term limiting the Supreme Court justices to 18 years, and then they would be allowed to stay in the federal judiciary, so it would still be a lifetime appointment. And then there are others who say they think Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico should be made into states, thereby creating 4 additional members of the Senate. Where are you on all those issues?
That's a lot of different,
it's a lot
of different issues.
But it's out there.
But listen, I've always opposed the idea of expansion of the court. I think that as a lawyer, as somebody who is a student of our history, we've had periods where the court was at odds with public opinion, and times when very powerful leaders who had the national will behind them, like Franklin Delano Roosevelt, thought that we should expand the court, and we didn't do it for good reasons. And I think some of those are that you don't want to overly politicize the court. Any appointments after that expansion would be seen as, in my opinion, illegitimate by many Americans. And to me, the legitimacy of the court is the main power that it retains. And so I've always opposed expanding the court. I think there are good arguments around an ethics requirements for the court. We have seen that there are enormous influences that are brought to bear on these justices, and they are really the only entity in our federal government that has such little oversight and insight into what they're receiving and who is influencing them. And to me, that is a common sense thing that we can do to restore some confidence, that we at least know who's influencing our justices, who are some of the 9 most important people on the planet, really. And so to me, that's the starting point that I'd begin with. When it comes to statehood and things like that, for Puerto Rico in particular, that's their decision, and I think if we can talk, there's some complicated cross currents there that we can talk about. I do think that DC has a strong argument for statehood, but I also hope that this could be something that is bipartisan. And I think that if we are going to go down this road, that we should do it in a way that folks don't see it as just an attempt to change the makeup of the Senate, but instead to have Americans be represented.
Congressman Colin Allred, as always, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Jack. Appreciate you.
Yeah.